Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Covenant Cast. I'm your host, Zach, and in case you've been living on the planet furthest from the bright center of the universe, X-Wing is getting a second edition, and so we are having a very special episode of the podcast right here. I am joined by the three co-designers of Star Wars X-Wing second edition. We're going to be telling the story from start to beginning for them all the way till now with second edition and how we got here. So I'm going to start off. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves and tell me how you got into Star Wars X-Wing.
So I'm Frank Brooks. I'm the designer of the game. I got into X-Wing at about wave 3.5 or so. I was at the tail end of Imperial Aces, and I bought a copy of the core set before I started interning there. But yeah, I'd only played it a little bit, and it was like, oh, it seems fun. And when I first joined the company as an intern, they said, do you want to work on X-Wing or Arkham Horror? And I was like, well, I'm a big Star Wars fan, so I got to do Star Wars. So I definitely picked up doing that. And then, yeah, that was my first thing working for Fantasy Fight.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What about you?
Hey, I'm Alex Davy, and I kind of maneuvered myself into what would eventually become the miniatures department. Right. When I started at the company, I was working on board games primarily. That's what I got hired to do. And there really wasn't a miniatures team. There were two dudes, Michael Gerns and Zach Tualtimus, working on this game called Dust Warfare. And I just thought it sounded really cool. I did a few board games and some Descent expansions, but I wanted to do mini stuff, and so I eventually was able to start helping out on Dust. And then when that game went away, I was able to get onto the X-Wing team almost about a month or so after you got onto the team.
Yeah. And
this was the period of time in which James Niffen, who had sort of shepherded the game through waves 2 and 3, was going to be moving on. So he kind of led wave 4 development, but kind of showed us the ropes and gave us his design philosophy and taught us a bunch of stuff. So yeah, Frank and I were pretty concurrently brought on to the game to kind of pick up where James left off.
Very cool. What about you, Max?
Yeah, so my name is Max Brooke, and I've been working on X-Wing for the shortest time of the three of us, though I think chronologically I interacted with it first. Because I actually did a little bit of playtesting for X-Wing when I was a role-playing game developer.
Oh, sure.
And then I playtested it a little bit in some of our early internal tests. I sort of thought, oh, this game is awesome. It seems like it's going to make us a lot of money. And then I sort of went off and did a bunch of role-playing books and didn't really think much about it for a while, except that those, sales numbers were always at the top. And then I had been working on role-playing games for several years, and they offered me the opportunity to branch out and do some other things, and one of those things was X-Wing. And at this point, Alex and Frank had been on X-Wing for 3 years
something like that.
or something, almost
I can't
without
really
a break.
remember a point in my life in which I wasn't developing for X-Wing.
And so they sort of I would say this is akin to the moment where before the Death Star trench run, they're like, just put whoever in the ship, they'll figure it out, and it worked out for us too, I think.
Very cool.
You came in at a good time too, because you had a lot of kind of wacky new ideas that we were able to use. It was kind of a much needed. Because Frank and I had gone through all of our first ideas and then our second ideas, our third ideas, and we're like, do we still have ideas? Turns out we did.
Yeah. So, kind of take me through, we're going to be going through the story here on this episode of, from those moments, right, all the way to today where you announced the second edition of Star Wars X-Wing, which I'm very excited about. And so from your introduction to X-Wing, right, you start working on it in your various timelines. But there comes a point in that development where maybe you start getting the inkling that something like a second edition is going to be necessary. So I'd be curious for each of you, at what point did those inklings start happening? And what was your initial, did you try to we don't need to do that, we can fix it with more cards? And just kind of your initial reaction to it.
Sure. So as soon as I started writing my own abilities, I wanted a larger text box. That would have been great.
So on the pilots or on the upgrade cards?
Yes, exactly. Because it's not that they need to be more complicated, but just to be more precise about what I want you to be able to do, I would like to use more words to do so. So that was one thing I wish we had earlier, basically. But Going through it, I felt like there was so much space to play with, and it was hard to tell initially how long the game was going to live, because it's like, many of these games kind of like, live or die. And
Most games live in.
Yeah.
They have a cycle. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And it was a competitive game, and so we knew it was like, it depends how many people like it. It was Star Wars, obviously, so it's like probably in a good position, but who knows. So for a long time, we just kind of kept putting it off, like, oh, it's, we'll see how the game goes. Obviously, its popularity did very well, and I was starting to keep like a log of like, boy, if we do a second edition, I'd like to try this out, like on a sort of way the game works kind of way.
Frank and I had a running pages document for years of just like, what would we do differently?
Yeah.
Like
And
just
so
noting
tell me
stuff
about-
down.
You obviously created a Pages document to note this stuff.
Yeah.
But it was like, at what point did you decide to create a Pages document? Do you remember? Like, was it?
I think it was like, so we used to share like a cube, like
Yep.
there was sort of like a C-shaped thing. And so I'd be like, hey, I'm trying to write this ability. It'd be really great if X-Wing worked this way. And
So we'd just be like,
we'd
all
be like,
right.
okay. And
Did
so
you ever get a
that.
chance?
yeah, we'd been going, and we'd had this like list enough that was like, okay, we've got like these at least 3 ideas. Like, let's put this down. And so obviously we'd come back to it and revisit it over time. Actually, the game's changed enough. We don't really feel that way anymore. And so, like, honestly, if we'd done a second edition earlier, it would be a different game than it is now, obviously. But yeah.
Did you have any different feelings there, Alex?
I don't know. I think the first few years I was just excited to be working on the game. It was still relatively new. The mass of content hadn't piled up quite so high at that point. And there were just, there were things on the immediate horizon to focus on, like a third faction was super cool. I was lucky enough to be involved in all of the Scum faction design, which
And that was like Wave 6, is that right?
5, was it? Or 6?
5 was the Decimator Outrider.
You're right. Yeah, 5 was like the little mini
Nailed
wave.
it.
Nailed
Nice.
it. Yeah, that was wave 6, and 7 was primarily a Scum wave as well. Which sounds gross when you say it like that.
Scum wave. It's like scum punch.
Yeah.
Punch.
But I think probably around wave 8 or 9, I was starting to see that a lot of the stopgap solutions we'd come up with, a lot of the things that we had tried to keep older ships relevant, were causing their own problems, like needing to buy upgrade cards to return older ships to viability, forcing you to go out of faction for those. Sort of became this. You sort of apply fix after fix after fix, and there's only so much you can do with a foundation that isn't as strong as you want it to be. So I think eventually we just started to realize how much we could accomplish if we were able to rebuild that foundation from the ground up. So I would say probably around then.
That's a good segue, because that's when I joined the game.
Yeah, exactly.
And for me, it was like, jumping out of hyperspace into a firefight, which was actually a really fascinating design challenge, because when I got put onto this game, I knew X-Wing. I'd played it, obviously. I did those early tests, but I hadn't stayed really current on it. I hadn't focused on it a lot. I was put on mostly because they knew Alex and Frank would be able to make strong, balanced content, and I really wanted to inject some new ideas, and that they'd keep my ridiculous ideas in check, which they did. And,
More or less.
More or less. And so, when I came on, I tried to really learn the design ethos of this game and understand, like, okay, what are the ideas behind this? Where do the faction lines lie? What defines one type of upgrade card from another? And the answer I found was, well, it had grown very organically, and so it was sort of, like a tree that had just kind of grown around to get to the light sources and of new design space, and just it was very.
Maybe unintentional.
I wouldn't say it was unintentional, but every decision was intentional in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And Alex and Frank had ideas, and you can see this in that, like, the Scum faction has a much more coherent identity than the Rebels and the Imperials, because it didn't have as long a time to grow in sort of an organic manner. There was more at the outset. Okay, Dead Man Switch is a very Scum card, and that was an early one. All these other things that sort of like they're kind of good, but they're kind of bad sometimes.
Feedback
and they
array.
might screw over your buddies. That was when I started thinking about, okay, what would a second edition look like? We have all these ideas of a design ethos, but we haven't codified it yet. And so Frank and I started having, when he rotated back on after Fury of Dracula, we started having a lot of conversations about, like, well, what should this upgrade slot be? What is an astromech actually doing for you? You know, like, we know that these are some existing astromechs, but which one of these is the astromech? You know, like, what is an crew? You know, like, what do we consider the, like, defining things? Who defines the, you know, like, Imperial faction? Is it, you know, like, Darth Vader crew who damages himself to trade things off? Or is it more like, you know, a Howl Runner who gives a group buff for flying as a group and encourages those behaviors? And so we started really talking a lot about that stuff. So for me, that's where it started to come together, that this would be a really cool thing to do someday.
Someday. And so at some point, right, a line gets crossed where the complexity or the lack of faction identity or the, you know, house of cards got built, right? Answer after answer after answer. The example I use a lot is like auto thrusters, which is like you have 360 turrets with the Falcon coming out, and then you have auto thrusters to make turrets a little less good. And then now auto thrusters can't be hit, so you increase offense, and then the offense is too strong, so you have to make healthier ships, and then you have to make healthier ships, so now the old ships don't have nearly enough offense or consistency, and all of a sudden it's like, the problem now is if you pull a piece out, it all falls, right? And you go back on itself. So lines get crossed. At some point, a decision is made, right? X-Wing is getting a reboot. You're starting over. Officially, it's happening. And so you have been I didn't know this, but you've been keeping a document, right, and a tab on, like, here's what we want to change about the core of the game. Not just like, oh, we maybe change the points here a little too much, or the, you know, this ability might be too strong. It's literally function, core game, mechanics, faction identities, all that kind of stuff. Going into that, right, you get prompted, hey, 2.0, here we come. What is your, like, what was the things, or number one thing you were ready and excited to, like, experiment with and change and look at improving in second edition?
Sure. I think my first response when given the opportunity to, like, hey, you can, like, play around with the system, and of course we asked, like, how much can we change it, you know, because that's always a question when you're making a new edition, where it's like, how similar to the previous game can you make it? Like, with, not to go too far into Fear of Dracula, there was a little bit of, like, how much can I change to still make it feel like the game that I made before,
what makes it feel like the game, right?
Right. And a lot of it has to do with, like, we found people really enjoyed the, like, action economy of action stacking. Like, that's really valuable to a good build. And so it's kind of like, well, how much liberty do we want to give it? Can every ship always do another action? Like, that seems a bit much, because then the game kind of just becomes everyone's super stressed all the time and things like that.
And a really good point in there is one conversation that we had, and then it turned into some research we did on our testers and talking to other people and really trying to understand, is like, what do people actually like about this game? What do they do because it's effective, but they don't necessarily actually like it all that much? What is the, like, core joy of X-Wing? And you two have always had a great intuitive grip on this, and I certainly learned it as I studied the game as well, that it's like, it's the flying the ships. But, you know, over time, the game very much became about sort of building these combinations and creating these things, and obviously that's a thing people enjoy. We want that to be in the game, but when we talked to our testers, we found that the number one answer was flying the ships. The number two was sort of getting the right build together. And then the number three was interesting. And interestingly, a lot of the best players in the world said this. The number three was bluffing. And imperfect information. And then sort of double blind. And, you know, like, so when we were setting about this, we really said, okay, those are the things we want to promote. People like cards that give them extra actions. They like cards that make them reroll dice. But those aren't necessarily good for the game just because people like them in a vacuum, because if you have enough of those, suddenly you have a game that doesn't really resemble what you liked in the first place.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, I think. And for me, what I wanted to do in second edition above all was return the importance of maneuvering, the importance of guessing what your opponent's going to do, and trying to think through that. Because the most fun I ever have in X-Wing is when I'm sitting there staring at my dials, and I'm not sure what my opponent's going to do, and I've thought through three different through lines.
The 3K.
Exactly, and every single thing that you analyze changes what you can do, and that's, to me, the true heart of the game. And so we sort of zeroed in on anything that didn't support that. You know, something that doesn't necessarily support that is the 360-degree field of fire, because that takes away the need to maneuver your front arc. Something, you know, engine upgrade being applicable to every single ship. Now you can't ever live in a world in which a ship that you don't want to have boost can't get access to boost. So anything that was sort of taking away from the importance of just just trying to figure out what your opponent's going to do and try to punt, for the most part, point your front arc at the enemy and be outside of their front arc is something we tried to reduce the importance of or eliminate altogether.
Well, and that really speaks to two of the three things Max was mentioning, which is the actual flying of the ships, right? And also the bluffing element. And so you're literally enhancing both of those at the same time with that, which is a really cool impetus. Anything else that was top billing in terms of core want to alter the game for any of you guys?
Sure. I mean, well, turrets weirdly were not on really the top of my priority list, because first of all, we had to think about how we're going to actually do it as far as converting. Is it a per ship conversion? Is it a big thing? Is it a wave-based thing? We went through a lot of different iterations on how to implement it, and it gets really costly if you go to per ship basis, and also just for stores, having to have all of the conversions and all of the ship, it gets excessive. So a lot of my initial design was just how are we actually doing that? So I spent a lot of effort in that capacity, and then the actions thing was next, and we were trying to get into this idea of the charge system. I don't remember when that exactly arose, but
That was
pretty early too.
Yeah, because we knew ordnance needed to be multiple shots.
Yeah, that was the other big one.
It's the charge action you're speaking to, upgrades like a proton rocket's having charges,
Yes.
and that's how many times you can use it versus
Exactly.
And
previously it was a one-time
super,
shot.
Right.
Yeah, it's super simple and quotidian, and it's not that groundbreaking or anything, but there's a huge difference in terms of your design capability between a card that you can only ever have. You have either a card that always works, or you have a card that works once and then it's done. That is incredibly non-granular. And we tried to backwards Band-Aid patch that with extra munitions and with all this stuff, but just having a bigger text box, something that quotidian can have huge design ramifications. So a bigger text box and being able to break upgrade cards and even pilot cards down into we want this ability to be used twice a game, 3 times a game, 4 times a game, once a game.
Gives you so many more
just
options.
being able to do that is huge. So that's one of the most straightforward alterations, but it's also provided a ton of extra design space and just room to have that granularity. And then just going to 200 points too.
Oh yeah.
Being able to be well, this card's not really worth 4 points, and it's definitely too good at 3.
Can't do 3.5.
You can't do 3.5.
That doesn't work out.
Do you make the game 2,000 points and have everything down to, this minute granular increment? That's probably not necessary. But just doubling the points does, we feel, give us enough more granularity than we had before.
Yeah, and so for
simple
people
stuff
unaware,
like that.
it's now 200 points.
Yes.
But effectively,
We gave ourselves
you're going to
points.
have to you're going to get about as many ships.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, for example, a TIE fighter was 12 points in first edition. We're looking at 24 points at the moment for a TIE fighter.
Kind of the
So
gold
it
standard
basically
of
just doubled it.
Point costing
Yeah.
and stuff. So,
Oh,
go
one
ahead.
little then, related to
I
the
would say
charges.
something else.
Oh, sure.
Get in there.
One of the little charge things is, we were saying the once per game, twice per game, once ever, that sort of stuff. But we've also given ourselves the ability to say, you do it once and then you can recover it and do it again. So you can have one, it just gets spent, and then you have a different condition that gives you the ability to do again later. So we've added some functionality with just having that kind of duality state of a card. It's it's either this way or this way, and different things are true whenever.
Yeah.
Is another, without it being a flip card. You can just have it work in that way as
Generally
well. That's a
speaking,
big one. But
charges are for on-off, and flip cards are for 2 different effects.
Yeah,
most of
that's
the
a
time.
good
There
point,
are a few charges that blur the line there a little bit, but
Sure.
And did you have something you wanted to add?
yeah. So I want to just say the things I'm most excited for. So the Force is a big one, obviously.
I was going to say it's related to the charges.
Exactly.
And it works very similarly.
And
So
we
hit me
actually
with it.
talked a lot about the Force in the panel. So I want to talk about a different one. I'm going to go with the Bullseye Arc.
oh,
The Bullseye Arc is, and this one has a good story behind it, which is that an intern of ours, a guy named Sean Hubbard, who's a really promising designer, did a bunch of good work with us, came up with the idea for a middle line on a ship It was actually originally due to like divide side arcs, I think, but we played around with this middle line a lot, and we iterated a lot on it with him, and then continued to iterate on it after.
When he had built this whole like apparatus.
Oh, there was a whole bunch
like
of
that
he was
you were
so
supposed
inventive.
to put on the front of your ship and stuff.
Yeah,
I was like, wait, why don't we just use what we?
But yeah, so
it's
we
like-
ended up with this. It was,
right.
and then it was a line for a while. But we were like, well, the line's kind of hard to line up. And then it was like a narrower thing, and then it became the width of the range ruler for convenience. So it evolved a lot while he was here, after he was with us. But there was a great moment where it became really fundamental to design because we were planning to use it on some ships, and our thought was like maybe like it'll be a jouster thing. So we want to really sort of reward them for like lining up on target and hitting. And we were in a conversation with Andrew Navarro, and he said just put it on every ship, and it kind of clicked, and we were all like, oh yeah, we should do that.
Well, why wouldn't we put a
should-
bullseye arc on
It was
every ship?
surprisingly easy. We thought we were coming into like, okay, we're gonna have to try to convince him, and it was like, oh no, okay, great.
He was like, I love that idea. Put it on every ship. And we were like, yeah, okay, we can do that. So that actually worked out great. It doesn't have any intrinsic effect, though. That's the best part.
It's just an arc.
It's just
an
there.
arc.
And yeah, not only the bullseye arc, but there's 4 quadrants on every ship.
That's a really good
now.
point as well.
So that's what also enables mobile firing arcs. And there's a center line in every ship,
Yep.
so you can do in front
So
of,
many
behind.
possibilities, right?
And it's just like, we haven't even scratched the surface of a lot of those things. There's very little that uses the sort of fore and aft of a ship at the moment.
Yeah.
The Reinforced does, a couple of pilot
one or two
abilities
abilities.
does. But the point is it's there for us. And we don't have to layer on this complexity in the future through 3 different upgrade cards, and it's just there, and we can do it, and it's simple and it's intuitive. Another good example of that is just firing arcs.
Yep.
Your firing arcs just have an attack value now. So if you have a fire spray, well, that has a 3 attack dice out of the front and 3 out of the rear, but the Lambda has 3 and 2.
The rear on the Lambda gets me excited.
That is exciting, right?
Come on, guys.
Just that alone, and just being able to split those into different values, which is something we couldn't do in first edition. And so the ships that we wanted to have different values, we had to get there through the incredibly Byzantine method of like titles and like the Arc 170 and the TIE SF.
Titles that give
Like
you
all
more
we
mods, mods that
really
give you more
wanted to do,
titles.
yeah, exactly. So it's all baked in now, and so it should just be a lot cleaner going forward. We can play with so many more toggles and switches and really give ships a much more unique feel.
And
Sorry.
I was just going to really briefly hit graphic design and say that
Right.
Oh, sure.
Sean Boyk did an amazing job.
that's so
on
good.
The graphic design, and what is the most impressive about especially the ship bases, they show this off really well, is how well they get across all that information we were just talking about without being incredibly busy or unusable. And he went through a ton of versions of that and just did an awesome job.
That's awesome. So, talking about all these changes, I think one of the more just craziest shifts to me is obviously pulling the point cost off the cards. So there's no longer point cost or upgrade slots on the pilots. There's no longer point cost on the upgrades. At what point in the second edition process did that come along, and how did it change the rest of the process?
Sure.
We knew from the start there weren't going to be points on the cards, right?
Yeah, we didn't want to.
That was perhaps our number one goal. Like
That was step
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
well, because we were trying to think, what can we get accomplished here, and like how can we keep this game viable? So
the long run, yeah.
for the long run, yeah. And so my big pitch was like, man, if we could just tweak points costs and not have them, frozen in amber on the cards that we print, we could solve so many of the problems that we were having in the competitive scene without issuing errata or FAQs, or if you have
Or
something.
new titles that reduce your point cost,
Yeah.
or give you an extra slot, or give
exactly.
you an
Add
upgrade.
So-
this slot, add this slot.
I'm fairly convinced that just that alone would have made a big impact on our ability to keep this game going.
Yeah, that was the only change.
Yeah, it's good that it's not, because we've been able to do so much more, and I think get to a much more much more interesting place for the future. But were that the only thing that we changed, I think it would have been a huge improvement.
Oh, yeah.
So we really started with that. That was a big part of the original pitch.
So, as you're going along, you take the point cost off the cards, right? You start tweaking. You have bullseye arc. You have everything that happened in second edition, right? It really is a great example of a second edition because the core of the game still very much feels intact, but a lot changed around this. Were there any decisions or changes along the way that maybe you didn't expect or were surprised by as you got in, right? Where maybe you knew, it makes sense to me that 360 arcs changed. It makes sense to me that You have front arcs, back arcs, all that kind of stuff. So is there anything that came along that you weren't expecting?
Sure. I guess one was we were like, can we get more text space? Oh, sure, easy. Like
Print it on a full card.
Yeah. although Dallas did a great job with the original design for the first edition, we asked like, can we please just get more space? But
we got to do our graphic design around our needs instead of the originally. They made the text space smaller because they didn't need it.
The abilities are.
If you look at the core set abilities, it's like
they didn't need anything more
Vader's
complicated.
like taking additional action.
Yeah.
So
reduce their agility by 1.
That's great for the first 30 or 40 ships you designed.
And then it's like, I need a paragraph here. I need at least 2 sentences.
Right, exactly.
Well, and not just design space, but also competitive precision, as Frank mentioned earlier. The ability
you want to be specific.
Exactly.
Yeah. But like, so with that wider text box, the next thought was like, hey, since we have this space, obviously we don't want to like just fill every card with text, because it's not like we want the game to be very complicated. But there are sometimes like a ship like the TIE Striker where part of its identity is the adaptive ailerons, and we really want it so that it's on there. But when we designed it, we had to kind of also prepare for you not equipping the card, which is obviously that dial behaves very differently when you have the forced move or not. So we really like, it'd be better if it's just stapled right to the card. And so now it's the ship ability.
So ships can now have abilities, right? All TIE Advanced have advanced targeting computer.
Yeah. Yep.
All TIE Strikers have adaptive ailerons.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting change. That's not something I would have looked at first edition and said, this needs to change.
Exactly.
No, and it wasn't in our original pitch.
No.
It was just something that evolved after we realized how much more room we had on the graphic design. And one of the things we were struggling with was like, the Imperial faction has always kind of suffered from just canonically not having as much stuff as the other factions. They don't have astromechs, they don't have illicit slots, they don't have a lot of canonically they don't have a lot of the things that the other factions have.
They have fewer ships that can carry crew.
Lots of different stuff. And so but the Imperials design each of their starfighters for a very specific role. They're highly specialized. And when every ship can have a ship ability, we can really get that across. And I think, they're the faction with the most ship abilities of all, because so many of their ships have very specific custom roles. So we're able to really express a lot more, of a faction identity by inventing the ship ability.
Yeah.
And it's also just fewer upgrade cards you have to carry around, and it's just a simpler, more complete design.
Yeah.
Well, I remember part of how that originated was someone, probably Frank or maybe you, Alex, said, wouldn't it be great if we could just have mandatory upgrades that you had to take? And then I don't remember how it came about. It might have been a conversation with Corey or with us or something, and someone was like, well, what if we just put it on the card?
Yeah, easy peasy.
And there it was.
There was a version where it was like on the back of the card for a little while.
That was
but
for a little while.
then it's like, then you had to remember, it's a
Yeah.
whole thing. And so it actually was like, well, there's enough space, we can just put it on the front. So
That's really nice. And you even have like the very generic pilots who have nothing except for that ability.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of space there, maybe some flavor text or whatever.
Yeah.
So any other changes that came about that maybe surprised you in the process?
Another one. We lost mini cards.
That's right.
Upgrades are LCG now.
Yeah, they're full standard.
They're full standard size cards. So when the idea was first floated, we were kind of like, I don't know, people are really attached to their mini cards, and it's like, how would that even work and stuff? Oh, depends, yeah.
You have to buy those little tiny sleeves, right? And then you have to like pack
them
it
in
all
the tiny
up, and like
sleeves.
it's like. It's fine.
But then we were kind of hesitant at first, and then we like tried it out, and actually like it works a lot smoother because it physically can't move. Like there's to jostle it, it's actually harder to move. Additionally, it is like the card is slightly wider that way, so we actually do have a little more text there, and the art's bigger than it was.
And we can put the squad building requirements on the far left side of the card, which you don't need those after you've built your squad.
Sure.
So you can just tuck those underneath and save table space.
That's really handy.
Yeah, and also instead of taking up the first line to say like Rebel only or whatever, it's just not on that space. So when you're playing the game, you don't have to be reminded like, hey, by the way, you have to be Rebel to have this card, because you're like, well,
I'm already Rebel.
I'm
so I
already
understand.
flying it. But anyway.
Another interesting thing that moment brings us to, because I remember we had a conversation about the viability of the stacking, and we were like, is it going to be too much space on the table? We don't know. And a lot of things, this is something I'm sure our board game developers are well aware of, but since I've worked mostly on RPGs and minis games, like, we make all our physical components, but we don't deal with physical components on the scale board games do.
No.
You know, they've got like 5 sheets of punch and a bazillion things, and they have to like really test it all. And so one of the interesting things about doing a second edition was there were a lot of moments where we're like, okay, let's build this. A good example of that was the mobile arcs, because we weren't sure they were going to fit on the small ships in a way that would
You can still
Yeah.
you could still see anything.
Get out the glue sticks and
And
the
so we
scissors
got
and-
out the glue sticks and said, well, I just taped that thing together. And it was while Frank was out.
Yep.
And we were like, oh yeah, this fits. Let's do it.
And so
ships.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say real quick that I came back to work like after that trip, and I sat down, and there's this little like, and I'm like, yeah, let's do this. Like that was my
Yeah, of
immediate
course.
response.
I think
like,
we left you a note like it works or something.
Yeah, I think so.
So, I mean, that's really interesting. You have these changes coming along, and I think, like I said earlier, there's some that make a lot of sense, even with the mobile firing arc. You see it, and it's like, oh, well, of course. Like,
Well,
that seems
duh.
way less abusive.
Yeah.
What were, if they did exist, and I'm sure they did, what were some of the moments that were maybe less easy, right? Which is, Alex wants it one way, Max wants it
yes.
another way, right? I mean, I don't know what change you might be able to talk about, but not even necessarily disagreement, but it was a longer discussion. It took longer to kind of pin down on how you wanted to do it. Any of those examples come to your mind? Alex was
What did we
grinning
fight
over there.
about the most?
We
Well,
thought
had
about a
some-
bunch of things. I think I was going to say, I mean,
And you're still friends today.
I remember, I have in the back of my, well, we both have very strong personalities. So does Frank. And our department is it's a good thing we all have pretty thick skins, because we tend to be very impassioned about things. Let's put it
It's
that
loud
way.
in there,
It gets
really.
loud in there.
And we keep our door open. We're kind of jerks. I don't know. Everyone else
I feel like you
hears
guys should stream this.
us. Basically.
Do you have wrestling names yet?
Oh God! I mean, there were a lot of things. So Alex has really great instincts, and so I tend to trust him. But he also doesn't always remember exactly what he said in the past.
Yes.
I will find myself occasionally
I know these
arguing with a
people.
previous
Version of yourself. Yeah,
And so
that's
I've
happened.
definitely had arguments. It got a lot easier partway through the development when I realized that, like, it wasn't that Alex was like coming back around taking the opposite side on an issue just to razz me. It was because he'd seen some things and his perspective had changed, and like now, you know, he flipped sides on this, and so, you know, there were just when I hit that point of where I could just be like, yeah, no, okay, I can see why you'd be right about this, because this was the position I argued last time.
So you're saying a career in politics, perhaps not the right.
I don't know, or maybe it is.
That's the right call. Who knows? Any other examples of maybe some of those kind of?
I have two. First one was how Calculate works. So that's a brand new
Right, so
action
how
game.
does it work?
So Calculate is you can spend it to change one focus result to success, a hit or crit.
Yeah, it
you're
doesn't
attacking or
sound
defending.
super
Evade.
exciting. It's basically crummy focus.
Yeah, it's just worse focus, which at first it's like, oh, what do we want to do?
It is
How
nice
would a
thematically,
droid-
though,
Yeah.
because, you know, droids, when we see them in Star Wars, unless they're very specialized, like our friend IG-88, tend to be a little bit bumbling.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're inferior to their human counterparts.
So
But we originally wanted it to be a whole new, much more kind of dynamic action, which would have fundamental changes to the game. And the more we played with it, the more we realized it was going to be really hard to balance, and that what we actually wanted was just a less good thing, so we could design abilities around it.
yeah, because it's sort of like a little kicker, a little bonus. You know, it's like it's great. You know, it's nice, but it's not a focus token. So in a way, we could give you multiple easier, or
And in fact, the IGs do.
yes,
You know.
So we
And
can
two
kind of play
calculated
with that.
is different from a focus, which is
Yes.
interesting. At the table, it plays quite differently.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
mostly better, but not always.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool to have that little flexibility. So that one was like, we went through a lot of different iterations. And the other one I think is just the way linked actions work. Because like pretty quickly on, we're like, hey, you know what's obvious design space? Red actions. Because like
Oh, wait a second.
there was a
that
certain
could
point,
be stressful.
right?
Yeah.
Where it was just like, well, I really, because we were going through and redesigning all the action bars, and so we were looking at the first ones like the X-wing and stuff, and the Y-wing. It's like, you know, we should probably get the Y-wing barrel roll. Like, you need repositioning. It's really important, and it's a small ship and all this, and so
We
it's
see a
like
barrel roll.
we see a barrel. It's
You literally can watch it.
you can watch it happen.
There's a GIF of this.
Yes, yes. So it's like, okay, this needs to happen, but it doesn't look the most I don't know, gentle or whatever. So we thought we can limit it a little bit by making it red. So that was a pretty like easy way to go about it. But there was the idea of the linked action where it's like, does it attach to multiple? Is it just any of the actions? Like, how exactly does that transition occur? So we went through a lot of different iterations with that one.
I can think of another good one actually.
Yeah.
This is a good example because I feel like this was a good example of both a disagreement and teamwork working well together, and also. Okay.
Continue.
Which was that I wrote the initial draft of the new damage deck because Frank was busy writing 5,000 other documents and
I was probably working on Legion or something.
Yeah, you were working on Legion, and no one looked at it for ages, and it was too complicated. Teamwork worked well here when Alex showed up and said, "Hey, I think we should change the damage deck," and I said, "Great, do whatever you want to it." And
That's
teamwork worked great.
That's a good approach, though, right? It's like, here's all my ideas in the crazy. And it's like, now you take it. I don't.
And it is much better now. It is way simpler.
But a lot of your stuff made it in.
It did.
I like the ion stuck. That was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one stuck around. That might have been yours though, actually. I don't
sorry.
remember. No, that's fine.
I like my idea.
I liked mine.
My blinded pilot stuck.
Yes, that one was good.
And how does the new blinded pilot work?
New blinded pilot is it's not quite so punitive as the old one. You can't modify your dice except by spending force charges.
Okay, so instead of
For
losing, the
thematic
old
reasons.
one was losing an attack.
Yeah.
So you don't lose an attack completely. There's nothing as mean as losing an attack completely anymore.
Yeah.
We do have that new skip a turn damage card.
Oh yes. It's called Frank Brooke skips a turn. It's actually wherever Frank is, he skips a turn.
Card number 34.
Skip a turn is Frank's least favorite game mechanic.
Because it's
ever.
like, hey, you were playing a game. How about you don't for a little bit? Cool.
Yeah, you just want to go sit out for a minute.
Yeah.
So, one thing I do want to mention on the damage deck, and you mentioned it with the graphic design and whatnot, but the damage deck now on the bottom has pips and numbers, right?
Yeah.
This is a Frankism.
Yes.
Indicating how many of these are in the damage deck.
Yes.
Right?
And like a card number. So when you're going through, you can sort of organize them. Because if you were missing both copies, you wouldn't know what cards you're missing.
Yeah.
And so if it's like, oh, missing card 12, great. I know it's the whatever 12 is. And so you can kind of look it up easier that way.
But like the pips, if there's 5,
Right.
5 direct damage, I think.
Yep.
You're missing a direct damage and it's
Exactly.
number 18 or whatever. it
Right,
is.
because that's the other,
So speaking of that, though, I get a sense. I played a game with Alex, and we actually posted that video of us playing. Played several games, actually, more videos to come.
They were great.
But for you. No, I'm just kidding. It was really
So
fun.
you won one, didn't you?
No, I definitely didn't lose them all. I'll say that. I don't want to spoil how many wins and losses there are, but Anyways, how much of because X-Wing, part of the magic of X-Wing for me has always been in its simplicity.
Yeah.
And how much the game makes you feel like you're flying ships around a table for being so simple. So you look at a small change like the damage deck, right, and the pips and the number, just a little. It's almost like a what's the word?
Quality of life.
Quality of life improvement.
Sure.
That's
Quality of life improvement.
That's the phrase.
So that's so funny.
We've been throwing that around a lot.
Yeah.
How important was that to the redesign, right? Which is just trying to make this game easy to play.
Oh, I mean, that's always a directive. When we said we want to do this, and they said, great, let's do it. Their immediate response was like to make it this simpler game. So one point I was going to bring up earlier, and I'm glad I get an opportunity to do it now, is with the way we handle like full front arcs, for example. Where with Azatok it was like, well, it's on the punch board and like you'll get it. That kind of thing. But now it's just right on the ship card. There's the firing arc printed is a full front arc.
It's like you have the number.
Yep.
Right under it, you have the arc, which shows you your arc.
Exactly. So it's little stuff like that with the way we with graphic design sometimes, like that example, or just having our ability to rewrite how abilities are created with words. We were able to do a lot of shortcutting and ultimately. Lost my train of thought. The
quality of life.
Quality of life improvements. So it's just easier to know what this effect means, or tell the difference.
You're trying
between,
to make it intuitive, eh?
Yeah, we dropped the expression free action, for example. That was a pretty early we're getting rid of that because you get one action during the perform action step, but so any action otherwise is a free action
inherently.
Inherently, it's not like we have a system for example Legion has you get 2 actions, so you kind of need this idea of in addition to the ones you normally have. But when you only have 1, anything else is clearly it's also there.
Yeah.
So that one was a pretty easy kill for us. And related to free actions, just last second. Oh, but yeah, there's a confusion of what a free action is. It's just an action.
Straight
Do
up.
the thing. I told you to do it.
Yeah, and who was the genius that was like, I think we should put a line down the middle of these templates?
That was you, Frank.
that
wasn't
was
it?
Frank.
Yeah.
Frank's that genius.
There he is. I found the genius on the team.
Yeah.
But that strikes me as another one of those, because not
It just
only is the line the
helps
template
with collisions.
with the bumping
Yeah.
and
You know?
that kind of thing, but it also, you look at something like a change to barrel roll.
Yes.
I don't know who was involved or
pretty good.
back then. But you have the line, and it's very, very restricted. So I feel like a lot of the abilities, and maybe that's the other side of this. You have
Sure.
the like literal mechanical changes, surface design makes it easier. But then you look at basically every ability getting reined in,
Yeah.
like a barrel roll.
Yeah.
So what do you think was, what's your favorite reining in the second edition of the game?
So, I mean, you already mentioned barrel, but the idea that you're having like the 3 positions, that one's pretty strong. But I think actually, for the gaminess that locking is, like target locking from first edition, I really enjoy the way we were able to handle that, because part of the game I've always really enjoyed is trying to estimate, like, a 2-bank will land me there. Am I going to clear that asteroid or not? Or is that guy in range for an ability? I hope so. Like, I really like maintaining that. And obviously you need to measure range at certain points during the game. But one that kind of felt exploitative in the first edition was being able to just, I'm going to target lock. Oh no, nothing's in range, but this guy's at range 2 and that one's at range 1 and that guy's an arc. And like, just knowing all this information. It just felt like some ships just had this weird bonus because they happened to be able to fail an action. Oh,
to just like put a template down,
yeah, exactly.
right, and see.
So by
And
having
you could do that with barrel rolls too. You could be
Yeah.
like, I'm going to barrel roll to the right, knowing that you're probably not going to fit, but you're going to try
You might
it
as well
anyway,
try, right.
and
If
slows the
you're-
game down.
If you're clever, though, that also might give you a sense of how far ships are away.
Yeah. So you could like barrel into an asteroid that you know you're gonna, oh no, I can't, but you can now see how close you are.
Yeah.
So it like changing lock to be, you've chosen to lock. So no matter what you find out from your measuring, you've done a lock action.
Yeah.
So you can't like, oh, the guy wanted it's out of range. Too bad.
You spent the time
You spent
trying
the
to
time
lock onto
doing
that
it,
ship and you failed.
Which I mean helps speed up the game a little bit
Yeah.
because you're just like failing actions in general is something. But anyway, I don't want to take up all the time.
I was just going to say, like, the biggest, joy for me with second edition X-Wing is that we had created so much content for 5+ years. All of our new ideas were in the game. We decided, we would throw stuff in there. Some of it we loved, some of it we didn't like, and we were able in 2.0 to just do this beautiful editorial process. Like, what works, what doesn't work, what do we love, what do we hate, what needs to go, what absolutely needs to stay. And that was such a great experience because it was very organic. It was like, and as things took shape, like linked actions, we
Yeah.
were like, well, we can get rid of the card push the limit, because so many ships now have access to multiple actions, but those multiple actions can match that ship's flavor. There's not a situation where every ship can equip, or almost every ship can equip push the limit and engine upgrade.
So they can
So
all-
almost every ship can something boost. And tons of ships could boost barrel roll.
Linked actions have an order too.
Linked actions have a specific order. They have a specific action linked to one other specific action. So, a TIE interceptor has an onboard ability where it's like, after it does any action, it can take a stress and it does a red barrel roll or a red boost. So a TIE interceptor basically has push the limit, old school push the limit, and that's great for that ship. That's exactly what that ship should feel like.
Yeah.
But the A-wing just everything links to boost. Through its ship ability, and some other ships may only have link a focus into barrel roll or something like that, and so every ship can kind of feel like it's supposed to feel canonically. The most nimble ships will feel like that because of their upgrades or because of their linked actions, and then the sluggish ships won't be able to bolt on stuff that doesn't feel right for them, and they'll simply have to be valuable. Well, for example, like a Y-wing, there is no engine upgrade anymore, so you won't have boosting Y-wings.
Well, there is engine upgrade.
There is, but it does something
Doesn't do
completely
that,
different.
yeah.
But yes, so I think that kind of just editorial process was really satisfying because we were able to just refine everything we'd been talking about and thinking about for so many years.
It was really cathartic to be like, oh, this like Garvin's ability from first edition. is not phrased like any other ability in the whole game. And it's always bothered me that it's like, how is no one concerned about this? Or not concerned, but like, why is
Wedge,
this not
too.
confusing? Or Wedge, which doesn't tell you that it ends. It's
Yep.
just their
Good old
agility is reduced.
Permanent agility reduction wedge.
Until when? Forever?
Yeah.
So it's stuff like that it was so nice to just go through and write all the abilities would be like just how it's supposed to be written,
Yeah.
you know.
You've learned.
Yeah.
You've learned a lot.
Yeah.
And so, I heard you mention earlier on the panel, and I would be curious to know how helpful this was. But removing the point cost, one thing I did want to touch on was how much more that is letting you in the design process focus on making ships feel like those ships
Oh, yeah.
Can I-
instead of
Oh.
balance. Did you have something to add?
Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah,
Yes.
take this one.
So I think that is enormously helpful, and it has made the testing process so much better on a couple of axes, actually. So for starters, it means that we can focus all of our energy in the initial pass on nailing that theme and making sure it functions. And so we don't have to spend that same energy on points at the same time. And that's where a lot of our biggest challenges in first edition came from. One of the takeaways, one of the many things that we can say, having 5 years of experience, that was a mistake in retrospect. There was no way to know at the time. But one of the takeaways is, not having points until later not having points that are locked in until later in the process. Obviously, we assign points values for testing, but means that we can really figure out like how do these things function, and we can avoid having these cases of this works like this, but it's too good at like these 2 points costs, or it's too much in between these 2 points costs, or this other upgrade is sort of squeezing it out. So we're going to change how it functions instead of changing how much it costs. So making that a two-step process is just incredibly valuable. So that's a big one, and it's really healthier for the design. The other place it really helps us is the added ability to really focus on faction theme, and really focus on instead of having to nail down every piece of does X faction have enough to keep up? Now we can say, okay, Imperial abilities are going to look like this. We'll points balance them to be competitive against Rebel abilities. We don't need to simultaneously guess what is going to be the case later.
Sure.
And balance these thematic abilities against each other before we even are sure what the final language is going to be.
Sure.
Well, and if we miss the mark, it's not a death sentence for the ship.
That's true as well.
There are a lot of really cool ships in first edition that just don't
see them.
you don't see them around very much.
Yeah, it's really cool.
M3.
The Seek, the Star Viper. There's a lot
Star
of.
Viper is the one that's like.
It
really
should be
painful.
so cool, and
is a
it
cool
has
ship.
a lot of fun abilities, but you
Made
just
that
don't.
Star Viper work for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on. That's true.
But I mean, like, if we miss the mark and something is just not seeing play, we can fix that. Or conversely, if we miss the mark and something is utterly dominant and everyone hates it and is so tired of seeing it, we can fix that too. And so we can concentrate a lot more on like, well, is this a fun ship with a unique role that it can play in this faction?
Yeah.
Is this something cool
And then
that
pick the
people will
points
want?
later.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
hopefully get pretty close on release. But if not, then we have the luxury of being able to fix that later.
And so you mentioned something I do want to get to before we get out of here,
Sure.
which is the idea of faction identity. And in the panel you guys were doing earlier, you talked about how that kind of got out of whack a little bit. What was the conversation on your end like with faction identity? How important is it, and how much of a debate was it on what is the identity of the faction?
So Max and I sat down at one point when I took an initial pass where I converted all of the text from first edition into second edition. Firstly, just to see.
a big task.
Yeah, it is. It took me a while, but on some level I knew we were changing things, so it didn't really matter too much about it. But it was partially just to test: is my new new words I've chosen able to manage everything we did in first edition? Well, I'll just check that first. So I did that. Assessing that, yes, we can do everything we need to do, and having to adjust things as needed. After I made that first pass, I was able to just lost my train of thought again.
Someone needs lunch.
Yeah, somebody's hungry.
So you're talking about faction identity.
Yes.
And going through your initial pass.
Right. So went through initial pass. We looked at all the cards again, and then we actually looked at what I had just done and been like, yeah, they're kind of all over the place. Like, yeah, that's just a good effect on this kind of ship. Oh, that's sort of like, I can see why we did that, or we discovered a new mechanic and we started to use it a lot, that kind of thing.
They weren't bad decisions in a vacuum. That's an important thing
exactly.
to say too. Is like, there's the whole like, principle in science and like any art and anything, where like you have so many advantages over the person who is your predecessor, right? Because you have access to the wealth of their knowledge. Frank happens to be standing on Frank's own shoulder.
I was just going to say.
Frank, but
I need a piece of art that shows this.
Me on my own shoulder, yeah.
Well, and then like the one you're standing on has different facial hair.
Oh, sure, right.
Yeah,
and probably different hair. And
but to that point, the ability to say, okay, we tried all these different things for, like Imperial pilots. They all make sense, but what is quintessentially Imperial? And so we sat down and we said, like, what are the quintessential Imperial pilots? And Al, I'm pretty sure you were involved in this discussion at various points too. What are the quintessential Rebel pilots? What are the quintessential Scum pilots? And then we did it for upgrade slots too. What does an astromech do? What does a crew do?
I almost feel like the upgrade slot one was almost a better discussion, because there's certain times where it's like, well, that ability really fits that character, right? Because it's like thematically, yes, that is correct. Is that intrinsically an ability that fits that faction theme?
Yeah,
Sometimes.
well, it's kind of like Vader.
Right.
He's kind of the exception to the rule of Imperial.
Exactly.
Right.
So that's the thing, is like often with pilots, you'd find like, well, they're kind of an exception to this. It's okay that we have that one. And I think across the board, that's
Faction identity can bleed a little bit.
can
Some
bleed a
Rebel
little bit.
characters are kind of scummy. Maybe they get a scummier ability.
Yep.
Some Imperial characters aren't such terrible people. Maybe they get a slightly
Easy now.
more rebel.
but
It
yeah.
is serving our empire.
But yeah, going through with the upgrade bars, that was my favorite one, because it's like, well, what does a crew do? How is that different than an astromech? Because they could be doing the same stuff, but
I mean, sometimes R2 is a crew member.
right? Yes.
Sometimes it's an astromech.
Right. And so when you do them, how would you like those to behave differently? So I think that was a really useful exploration.
So even just upgrade identity.
yeah, exactly. Upgrade identity.
What is a missile versus what is a torpedo?
Yep.
And a lot of these things had a decent identity buried in there somewhere, but after so many years of content, they had kind of drifted.
Yeah.
Like we said earlier, the Scum faction has maintained probably the clearest, most cohesive sense of identity. Just like, I'm going to do a thing that's going to help me, but it's also going to hurt me, or it's going to hurt my squad mate.
Sure.
And so we just sat down and we were just like, what do these factions really, thematically embody? Scum, they're out for themselves. They're bounty hunters, they're mercenaries largely, they're
Individuals
criminals.
that happen to be working together.
Yep, they happen to be loosely affiliated, but
Yeah.
it's the classic heist movie. There's going to be a double cross. If someone's
Yeah.
going to be able to get ahead,
I love that
they're fine.
idea.
I'm going to just take your focus token.
Like picturing, like one of your Boba Fett ship doing damage to your IG-88.
Exactly.
And, like, IG-88 goes down, but Boba Fett succeeds. It's like,
it just
that
makes
is so
sense.
scum, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. And
Yeah.
then Rebels was also pretty straightforward. I mean, they embody the heroic sacrifice. You look at the trench run. They are all focused on the mission. They are willing to die for their teammates, for their wingmates, and they all of their tactics revolve around setting up for that run and supporting that. So a lot of the Rebel abilities are like, pick a squad member and buff that particular person. We need to get Luke to the trench so he can shoot those proton torpedoes, and we're gonna go all out to do that.
Yeah.
And then the Empire, a lot of faceless, nameless goons. Their quantity
Goon is
over.
such a harsh word.
All right, idealistic, naive.
Just Imperial citizens.
Citizens, there you go.
Citizens
All
of the Empire.
But they have the whole quantity is a quality all its own kind of ethos. They're going to make a ton of TIE fighters, and there's just going to be too many of them. They may individually be poor, but they're going to win the day through numbers. And that's at the core. And then you look into the other kind of thing that the Empire is known for, which is like advanced weapons development.
They have
So
funding, technology.
yeah, funding technology. So having all those ship abilities, having more ship abilities than any other faction, having each ship have a very specific role rather than a generalist role. You can look at a Y-wing; it's a turret ship, it's a support ship, it can be a bomber, it can shoot torpedoes. Well, that's not how the Empire do. If they're going to drop bombs, they're going to build one ship that drops the bombs. They're going to build another ship that does this.
They have an escort ship. They have a
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, I mean, Emperor gets his own ship, right?
Right.
With a wing of guards around him, where it's like, what's Leia got? It's like she's got whatever they have sitting around.
Exactly, and that translates into game mechanics really nicely. So that was sort of just where we started with all of it. Like, what are these things thematically? How do we make that a game design choice? And one of the things we did was we gave every faction their own talent. That it's there's a rebel only talent, there's an Imperial only talent.
What's the talent?
Talent is the formerly known as elite pilot talent slot. So the EPT in old school parlance.
We
Okay,
realized
so
that
every faction has unique talents.
Yes,
Yes.
we realized there were 2 extra words riding along with talent.
it-
It didn't actually tell you very much.
Because it was from a marketing article where they were just trying to talk about it.
Elite pilot talents.
Elite pilot talent.
Yeah,
So
that's
then
the
that-
funny thing about first edition. Those icons did not have names.
No,
until
it's not in any
marketing
document
named them.
except for marketing, and then people
That's
just
so
took
funny.
off. Yeah, right.
Yeah, even like pilots go become an initiative, right?
Right.
Just honing in and making it more intuitive and simple.
Yeah.
So very cool.
But yeah, so there's selflessness for the rebels, or selfless is the talent, and it's just take damage for your wingmate. Ruthlessness, ruthless is the Imperial talent, and it's just like your
That's so funny.
your
It's the
ships
opposite,
can
right?
your ships can suffer damage to do damage to the enemy because you're not concerned about DS 175. If he gets into your field of fire, so what? There's 10 million more TIE pilots
Yeah.
out there.
So this
And
will
then
transition. Oh, sorry.
I was
Scum
going
one,
to say
yes.
the scum one, which is fearless, which is just like if you are right in the enemy firing arc, like right there, living life on the edge, you get a benefit from that.
That's cool. That's really cool.
You get to add some.
And that kind of speaks to the foundation of each of those factions.
Yeah, it's just a little nod to their faction identity, and it's just a fun, card that only that faction can equip, and it can change your tactics a little bit.
So I know we're not here to rep Wave 2, but also Wave 2. I feel like we actually were able to, when we broke off the resistance in the first
I was
order.
gonna say that's got to be a challenge.
It actually was way easier than it sounds.
Yeah,
Tell me about it.
We
Come
were a little
on.
concerned about it initially because we had that conversation. We were like, "What makes them different?" Like, well, actually, they kind of are different.
They are. So like, of course, the resistance is like it's down to like at the end of the movie. There's like basically 20 people. Around.
Spoilers, Frank.
Oh, sorry. In case you've not watched the Last Jedi.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's all about like their star players.
I would say, and Poe is probably the best pilot we've seen in a movie on screen.
Just ever. So
He kills so many people.
Yeah, well, there's that one like 12-second scene
Oh,
where
yeah.
it kills like 12 TIE fighters.
Yeah.
1 a second.
and then some stormtroopers off the ground.
Yeah,
and
it's like
then
20
flies over
guys on the
there.
ground.
Yeah.
He's
So
one heck of a pilot, right?
Star players.
Yeah, so it's all about like the big star players. So they still have a little bit of the camaraderie and things, but I think Jess Pava's ability from first edition is very similar in
you're-
second edition.
yeah.
And it's the idea that it's like you're in it, you're with your friends, but it's not really benefiting your friends. It's helping you, but it's like you are working together.
Yeah.
And then First Order is just sort of like the Empire amped up. So they're very much like, it's just extreme cause, like we're doing it
fanatics.
fanatical, we're doing this thing for real.
So it's less like I am a servant of the Empire and more like I've drank the Kool-Aid.
Exactly.
Like, well,
Yep.
I'm self-sacrificing because I believe in this cause. Like,
Exactly.
we gotta
You
go
were
get
raised
revenge.
from birth to believe in this cause. And
Yeah, so
that's
honestly,
super
I think
cool.
those
Yeah.
have very strong. They're like Scum. I think there actually are stronger faction identities than the Rebels and Imperials.
Well, and
still,
even when you start out, it's cool because if you start designing from a perspective of we're going to build these identities and maintain them, you get a different result than we added bullseye arc. So like let's see how every faction might mess with this.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. All right. So final question from me, for you three is what about second edition? Looking ahead in the future.
Yeah.
As a designer, as someone who just enjoys watching the game, what are you most excited to explore and to see in the future of X-Wing?
Honestly, I think it's ship abilities because it really makes that ship that has otherwise an identical action bar, dial. You could pretty much make all that the same, and then that one little pilot ability or ship ability plays completely differently.
The forced upgrade.
Yes, the
effectively.
forced upgrade means you can just make them have to do something.
Or potentially forced downgrade.
Yeah.
We could do one that's just negative.
Yeah. So there are some that are just, this is a detriment. Keep in mind, you always have to do this. I mean, adaptive ailerons is sometimes bad.
It's definitely a trade-off.
So, anyway.
For sure.
That's
what
what
about you,
I'd
Alex?
I think I'm just looking forward to seeing how things evolve. I'm so curious to see what people are going to do with we're dropping such an enormous amount of content right out of the gate.
Insane.
It is.
I mean, you've
You know,
had
it's
5 years
all-
of ships.
Yeah,
Here you go.
it's
And it's
everything
all going to be
again.
playable, and experienced players will have an idea of what ships do, but so many of them are so very different. And the points costs are all very different, and certain linchpin cards are gone. There's no veteran instincts. There's no push the limit. There's no auto thrusters in the way that we remember it. No engine upgrade in the way that we remember it. And so I'm just fascinated to see what happens when players have essentially kind of a clean slate. People are going to have to unlearn what they learned, and I really do think it's going to focus on those core skills. I think the good players are still going to be good players, but their lists are going to look nothing alike. And I can't wait to see that. That's going to be really exciting.
I am also excited to see what those players come up with.
And to see how the app evolves things. See how the app influences competitive play when we can make those corrections. And we're hopefully going to have a world in which just about every ship is viable, and there's a huge meta diversity out there, and that's the goal. And I'm very curious to see how that plays out.
That's awesome. What about you, Max?
Well, I think there's two things. So, from a designer seeing the game flourish standpoint, I think the fact that things aren't cast in stone is the thing that I'm most excited about. The fact that there's probably our players are smart people. They're gonna crack the code. They're gonna figure it out, but for those players who love exploring and finding the new builds, as Zach was saying in the panel, nothing's cast in stone. This combination of cards is great right now, but some things might shift around, change, new things will be added, points will be adjusted, and suddenly you have to go in and rediscover what's really strong, and you have to start experimenting again and learning. And I think just sort of that feeling that even if there's something that I don't like dealing with right now, it's not going to be around forever. It's sort of there's I guess sort of an impermanence that's kind of liberating.
Yeah.
Because it's all right, I can just have fun with this build and try to get really good with this, and then I'll learn something else down the road. I think as a designer, just for a pure design standpoint, the thing I'm most excited to continue to explore is some of the things that we've been able to work in from the start, but don't necessarily have a ton of content for at the moment. So force powers are a good example. We have a pretty clear picture of where we want to go with them. We know what they do. They're these sort of paradigm-breaking effects. They let you do stuff like look at people's dials or things that break the fundamental the rules of the game. But we haven't explored them that deeply yet. We only have a few because we don't have,
Well, we wanted to have a really good understanding
Yes.
of the way that mechanic is going to affect gameplay.
Oh, yeah.
Before doing anything wild.
Exactly.
With it.
That seems.
So
And
we kept
similarly calculate. We
Yep.
have this tool. We have a lot of interesting things we can do with it down the road. We've already thought about a lot of them.
But we kept it pretty light to start with. So we can, exactly.
And so we've really left ourselves a lot of space, and I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
That's
More
awesome.
design
Well,
space.
you got something to add?
I have one last thing.
All right,
Sorry.
one more thing.
Off the idea of as a player, what I'd be excited for if I were a person,
Just a player, yeah.
just a player, is the fact that we're going to be running events that are just the new stuff. So for some people, they really like having all 13. I guess is how many waves there are out now. I don't know how many.
14's coming.
14's coming.
I thought that was wave
58
No,
ships.
it's going to be 14 with Cells Renegade.
Yeah.
Right.
Either way, all these ships. Some people really like that game. I kind of like it when you're forced to have to play with hey, just these couple.
I can't tell you how much I agree.
Yeah.
I love draft and
yeah.
Destiny, right, where it's much more limited pools. So I totally agree. I'm excited to see what you do. The app
build
opens up a
draft,
whole new
Zach.
world, right?
Oh yeah.
That's what's up.
I think quick build draft could be a thing.
Oh yeah.
Could be really fun.
Yep.
And who
Even
knows,
just
right?
even just randomly building a squad with quick build cards
Yeah.
is really fun.
Shuffle.
Or you
Yeah.
get one and you have to build the
Oh,
rest
that's
of
pretty
it. Like,
crazy.
what
Yeah.
on earth do I do
Yeah.
with this nonsense?
Yeah,
Who
we've had
knows?
some fun with that.
Well, I'm so excited to see where you guys take us.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to see it. And I'm sure we'll be touching base along the way.
For sure.
To all of you watching, thank you so much. Your support literally lets us do all of this, and we really appreciate it. We have plenty more to come for Star Wars X-Wing 2nd Edition. I included a blog, which we'll link to in the description, with everything you need to know about 2nd Edition. Until then, keep playing.